Hi, and welcome back to ConTinual. It's another episode of Hot Off the Press, the show about new releases and the authors that bring them to you. And tonight we have got a star-studded group here. I'm going to be your host, Jim Nettles. But before we dive in too deep, let's see who all is bringing stuff to stack up on that to-be-read pile. So, Alledria, you are up first.
Yay! I'm Alledria Hurt, and my new release is coming up at the end of January, and it is called Align, a YA sci-fi novel.
Toni?
My new release is actually an old release at the same time. We're doing a new edition of Dead But Not Forgotten, stories from the world of Sookie Stackhouse that I co-edited with Charlaine Harris, that Jonathan Maberry has a story in.
I loved working on the book.
Amy?
My name is Amy Lane, and my newest release, and it's today, is The Tech. There's a picture, and is the fifth book of what I've been calling Gay Leverage, if you watch the series Leverage. So, Thank you.
Jonathan, you're up first, or up next.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Maberry. I'm the author of a bunch of books. My latest, and you can tell how new it is because I don't even have my full copies yet. These are still advanced reading copies. Son of the Poison Rose. It is a very, very, very large epic fantasy novel. Second in my Kagen the Dammned series. And since this panel is not the day we're actually, you're going to see it out there, a couple of weeks in the future. From the past, I'm telling you, it's launching big today.
Lisa?
Hi there, my name's Lisa Oliver, and I've written roughly, I'm almost at 100, I think it is, paranormal romances. I'm a huge believer in fated mates, and my latest release was the story about the ancient god Helios, and it was entitled Give Me a Reason. It came out just before Christmas, so I'll be talking about that today.
And Aaron?
Hi, I'm Aaron Rosenberg. I am a novelist, children's book author, and game designer. My latest novel is Yeti Left Home. I don't know if you can see it well enough. Comes out February 1st.
So let's dive into all these stories. You're going to have plenty of a choice to pick from. So, Alledria, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's the world we're going to be setting our feet into in this new story?
Align is a sci-fi novel set in a post-apocalyptic Earth where most of the arable land has been turned into desert. There is three spaces that one must be aware of. One is the space station Faithful, which is where the Ascended live, the Middling Academy, where the children are brought up, and the Undercity of Disaster, where the Descended go. In order to ascend or descend, one has to drink nanites.
So, Toni, let's dive a little bit more into this collection we're bringing back.
To be fair, this world is not my world. It is Charlaine Harris's Sookie Stackhouse world, and I do have the cover. I don't have the book either because it's supposed to come out next week. And this is the newest cover. It's gone through a couple of different iterations, and since it was first released as an Audible original some years back. So what Charlaine and I did is invited people we knew who read the Sookie Stackhouse books, and these are based on the books, not the series, and got their own takes on the characters and the settings in the world. So the world was Bon Temps, Louisiana, a small town where in a world in which vampires and werewolves are all out of the coffin, so to speak. Now, the protagonist is Sookie Stackhouse, but Sookie doesn't appear in most of the stories. These are all the side characters. So we have, a werebat, and we have a couple of werewolves and a couple of vampires, and who are and one half-demon side character, who all star in their own stories. And also one guy who goes by the name of Bubba. He's from Memphis, and he used to like blue suede shoes, if that's any clue whatsoever.
Nice to see Bubba get his own story.
Oh,
yeah, he did get his own story from the late Bill Kreider.
Oh, wonderful.
So, Amy, how about you? Let's find out a little bit more about our gay leverage.
Gay leverage. I as people who write contemporary romance know, there is a lot of world building that goes into contemporary romance. Is this a world where you worry about your medical bills and making rent, or is this a world where everybody's rich and you have your own gym? And 95% of the time, it's you have to worry about dust and leaks in the ceiling for me. But for this one, they have their own gym. They have become very, very rich on grifting. And after Felix and Danny, who had made themselves very rich on grifting, recover from a 10-year split, they have formed this sort of family. When they first got together, they were going to make one big score. They were going to screw over a really, really, really bad rich man in Rome. And it turned out this bad rich man had an abused daughter, and she was pregnant, and she had no way to get away from him. So for 10 years, their big con was that Felix and Danny were together. And she had the baby. They were a lovely found family, but the pressure got to Danny and he left. He was drinking too much. He left. He came back 10 years later to bail Felix out of a jam. And now this found family has collected other people, and their job, they feel, is to do good crime. They have all the resources in the world, much like in Leverage. They have all the resources in the world. They can they can steal more money at any point in time, or make it in the stock market because they're good at that. But they want to fix the wrongs in the world that they know no one else will fix.
Nice.
Jonathan.
So, Son of the Poison Rose is the middle book of a trilogy, my first epic fantasy trilogy. Deals with there was an empire called the Silver Empire that was peace and justice and all the wonderful things, and it's completely destroyed in the first chapter. So this part of the backstory is that when the Silver Empire was established, magic was forced out of the world. So for 1,000 years there has been no magic. And then in the first book, the Witch King, a hereditary title from one of the smaller nations, the guy figures out how to bring back magic. And he brings it back big with the god Hastur, the king in yellow, as his patron god. And there is politics and adventure. The main character, Kagen Vale, was the captain of the palace guards. And the entire imperial family was killed. All the children were killed. It was his special job to protect. And all this happens while he's drunk and asleep in a prostitute's bed. So he wakes up with everything falling apart. His gods abandon him. That's why it's called Kagen the Dammned. And he is, in the second book, he is building an army of mercenaries and other people to try to fight back, and bringing in some unusual allies too. The fun underpinning of the story, aside from the fact that it's set on Earth 50,000 years after our society completely collapses and everything rebuilds, the cosmology there, the empire that was crushed was a agrarian society, was the gods of the harvest. But now what's left are the religion of Hastur and an island nation, the religion of Cthulhu. And so there's a couple and Cthulhu's not the bad guy, which is interesting, because I decided to spin that a little bit. Depends on who's worshiping him and what he can do for his people. There's a lot of humor, a lot of violence, a lot of politics, and I had fun building all sorts of characters into it, strong male and strong female characters, and good and bad evil. So it's been a hell of a lot of fun to write, but it is really in this middle book, the character's coming into his own, getting his act together, drawing out allies together, and has some really big, sprawling, fun action scenes that I love to write.
So, Lisa, tell us a little bit more about what world we're going to be falling into with your characters.
Well, the Gods Made Me Do It series, of which Helios is number 13, I think it is, was basically, the world is the one that you and I live in. It's the normal world that we wander around in.
You think this is normal?
Well, perhaps let's say maybe 3 years ago normal. And paranormals aren't out in this particular series. I do write other series where sometimes they are, but in this particular series they're not. which can make it really difficult. The whole premise for the Gods Made Me Do It series was the idea that if you were one of the ancient gods, and you weren't allowed to interfere in mortal affairs anymore because that came about after the Great Wars, and too many people died, so it was decided by everybody across every pantheon that gods were no longer allowed to interfere in mortal life, which made for an awful lot of very bored and probably lonely gods too, because they weren't worshipped anymore either. You know, the ancient gods that I'm referring to, like Helios, he wasn't actually he wasn't worshipped for very long in the first place. And now, of course, in modern day, very few people sort of know his name, or they think, oh yeah, he's the guy that rides the chariot. So that was the premise behind Helios' story. And in fact, in all of the god stories is basically, what do gods do when they're bored? So the Fates came along and decided, okay, well, we need, because the human population and the mortal population is expanding so rapidly, we need more permanent threads for the weave, the tapestry of life. So it was a case of, oh, well, these gods have got nothing to do and they are permanent. They're obviously permanent threads in the weave. So we'll make them up and we'll see what happens. And that's where Helios comes in. Yes.
Aaron, how about you? So is Bigfoot going to help us cross the street?
Well, Bigfoot may not, but the Yeti will. Yeti Left Home is the first book in a series. It's an urban fantasy series. I like to describe it as Eureka meets Grimm. And it's about a mild-mannered Yeti who finds a supernatural community in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul.
It seems really reasonable somehow.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, totally.
I've been in Minneapolis. I'm not sure if anybody would notice. So, Toni, let's actually start here. Let's talk a little bit about, especially with this collection, some of the characters that are going to be brought into the world. You know, do we have new characters, or is it all side characters that we've gotten to know and love?
You know, it's a mix. When we started to do the anthology, Leigh Evans, urban fantasy writer, we had invited her. She had started out actually knowing Charlene as a fan, as part of Charlene's fan group, the Charlatans, which I named, by the way. I didn't think she was going to do it, but she did. And so she said, you know, I'm Charlotte, and she'd gotten published. She'd had several books out, so we decided to do this anthology. She was one of the first people we asked. She said, oh, can I use the Todd and Beverly from the makeover show? And it's like, what makeover show? It's like, in one book, the opening chapter, there's a moment where Sookie is watching a TV show which is a person makeover show, a fashion makeover show with vampires. It is about 3 paragraphs. She's like, has anyone grabbed that one yet? And it's like, no, sweetheart. Nobody else remembers but you. You can have that one. And she was so delighted. And she did this delightful story about makeovers and different, how standards of beauty have changed over the years, and kind of, you know, why was it Desiree, that was her name, why things were so different for her because of living through the ages and how standards of beauty had changed. It made a rather sweet little story, but she was so excited to get that character, thinking that surely everybody was lining up to get that one. But other characters, we had one from the vampire Eric, we had one from Pam. Nobody tried Bill, which surprised me. We had a couple of people who wanted to do the werewolf character, Quinn. In fact, Jonathan, I think we were one of the ones who wanted to do one, but somebody had beaten you to it.
Yeah, I did Mustafa.
You did Mustafa instead. So we had lots of good werewolves and a werebat story. But it was funny that most people picked instantly exactly who they wanted and were sure that everybody else would want it. And other than Quinn, there was no competition whatsoever. Everyone has their favorites, which you get in a long-running series.
Yeah.
I did the half demon. The reason I've got both names up on my piece is because Toni edited, but Leigh wrote a short story for it. So I got both names in there. The only time that'll probably ever happen, but it was fun.
That is delightful.
So, Amy, let's talk about, let's dive a little bit deeper both into your team and who are they getting to play with as the foil this time?
Okay. Well, Danny and Felix are the core couple, and they get together in The Mastermind, which is the first book. And then you have the staples of heist movies and the heist genre getting together with their significant others in the course of I believe the second one is The Muscle, and that's their mercenary, and he ends up paired off with their very flighty thief. The third one is The Driver, who is munition and transport, and he actually falls for a client, someone who needs their help. The fourth one is The Suit, who is their legitimate insurance guy who thinks he's the most boring person in the world, and their mechanic just falls for him, just head over heels, and he's like, me. And that is The Suit. That one involves murder birds, which is a fun concept. I thought murder birds was hilarious. And this one is The Tech, and it involves I had to work hard on this one. Some books you have to work really hard to make them exciting, and it's not that introverts don't have exciting lives, and it's not that their love lives aren't exciting for them, but in the context of an action adventure series, unless you work really hard, what you have is glaciers mating. But they're very sweet and they're very genuine. It's The Tech and their forger, and these are both people who prefer to work alone, and neither The Tech is very definitely neurodivergent. The forger is just very damaged, and they're getting together in the middle of this hurricane of extroverts and conmen and thieves and swaggering munitions and transport drivers and people who do not hesitate to speak their mind or steal your wallet. And in the middle of all this, you've got these two very quiet, very sweet young men going, I think you're awfully sweet. And it was that dynamic, that Eye of the Hurricane dynamic, that for me made this one a lot of fun. Especially the thief.
Well, the thief's all the one everyone loves. Steals the heart away.
He did.
So, Jonathan, let's find out a little bit more about everybody that's playing around in your world, that little tiny book that you've got going there.
Well, the main character is Kagen Vale, and he's in the first book. He spends about a third of the book drunken in despair. Everything he wanted, everything he believed in, everything he thought he was destroyed in the first couple of chapters. And post-traumatic stress disorder essentially is the subtext of that, which you don't often see in epic fantasy. So I got to explore that a little bit. I know something about that from my own family. And quite a few friends. But also, I wanted to play with characters who kind of go against type a little bit. I mean, the most effective warrior in the entire world of Kagen Vale was his mother. And that's why the second book's called The Son of the Poison Rose. She was the fiercest fighter. She was a knife fighter rather than a swords person. And, he inherits her knives. She dies, again, in the first couple chapters of the first book, so it's not a spoiler. He inherits her knives, and he was her protege. So he's now, growing into his power as this warrior. His two best friends, one is a former pirate, and the other is a caravan scout, and they're a lot of fun to write because male and female, very powerful in different ways. So it also allows me to explore how power is defined by different types of characters. The villain is the Witch King, and his true identity is a big reveal at the end of the first book, and since not everybody has read that yet, not going to reveal that. But it's a huge reveal that changes the whole dynamic of where the story goes. And Kagan's kind of lover, is a character deliberately based on a combination of characters based on the Lady of Shalott, La Belle Dame Sans Merci, and a few other characters from folklore and poetry, where I took, essentially the model of the elfin princess and then warped it a bit in some interesting ways. And she's the good magic user in the story, though she's trapped in a tower. So when we get up to the third book, she'll be emerging from the tower to do battle with the Witch King. And there's just tons of fun characters in it. And it was one of the interesting things about creating the characters for the story is I had written a couple of epic fantasy standalone stories years before I did these books. And I, since I set them in a non-specific fantasy world, I was able to take those stories and fold them into the backstory. And one of them is a character who's first appeared in a Sherlock Holmes anthology. I co-edited a Sherlock Holmes anthology called Baker Street Irregulars. And the premise was to do a Sherlock Holmes and Watson model with anything except two white men. So the version I did was two women. And the older woman was the chief investigator for the Office of Miracles, and her apprentice being the Watson character. Both those characters are in this book, a little older, and that investigator character is somewhere between the Van Helsing and the chief strategist. So she's kind of the brains behind everything, and then we have other characters, filling in different slots. But there's also, throughout the book, there are these incidental characters that show up in a single scene just to show how the effect of magic impacts different lives now that it's returning. And some of those, I've gotten so many letters from readers asking if those characters will have future stories. And no, they're not. They're just there for that moment. But it's nice that the characters touch the readers that much that they want to see more of them. And also I have a character, one of the characters has an unusual way of cursing that I won't share here, but I've had a lot of people use his curses as a way of saying hello to me, which is both disgusting and hilarious.
I think we have an opportunity for merch.
It's been proposed.
So, Lisa, let's find out a little bit more about your team and everybody that's having fun in this world.
Well, this one was slightly different, and I have to admit, about halfway through, I actually put it up in my group that I thought I should delete the whole thing because, as I've mentioned before, I write fated mate stories. And I have read over the years numerous reviews from people who get annoyed with insta-love stories, and none of mine are like that. I don't write insta-love stories. The whole purpose of my books are to be a journey between two men who meet in whatever circumstances, and then they learn that you've got to get to know each other. And it's no different if you're a god and a bear shifter, and that's what we have in this book. We have Helios, who's the god of the sun. The book opens with him not wanting to get out of bed because, quite frankly, he's just had enough. He's seen, thanks to my series, he's already seen his brothers Poseidon, Zeus, and Hades all have mates of their own, and he didn't have one. So he figured he was working on the laws of three, and he figured that the fates had pretty much just decided he wasn't important enough and he wasn't going to get one. And it requires a feisty little human who happens to be mated to one of his the horses to point out to him that, nobody was going to come and knock on the House of the Sun's door and introduce themselves. So he kind of needed to get himself out there. So anyway, he does. And he meets Bruno, who's a bear shifter. But it was interesting hearing a couple of references here today about PTSD, because this is actually one of the underlying themes for Bruno. But he doesn't realize it. He believes he's perfectly fine the way he is. And unfortunately, when you're a god, you may have copious powers, but one, you're not allowed to interfere, and two, powers like that don't work on things like PTSD. And one of the struggles I had with writing the God series was that, because most people have a general simplistic idea that, as a god, you wave your hand, everything's right with the world. And of course, that's not the case at all. So in this, it was a real sort of struggle, because Helios couldn't do anything to influence Bruno in what he was going through. And Bruno didn't realize that he was actually going through any major issues at all. But it did turn out that, yes, he had PTSD from a childhood trauma he didn't remember. And it actually took the introduction of a mated pair from a previous book I'd written, which was Baby, who was one of Poseidon's son, who I mated to. I was trying to be very careful, and so I created a god called Owen, who is sort of like the overseer of all of those gods that fall under the Native American pantheon, the native tribes pantheon, I beg your pardon. In New Zealand, I have to sometimes double think and work out what is the politically correct way of saying things. But I created my own god for that. And he is actually one who comes along and spirit walks with Bruno to help him see in the timeline of life where it is that he got a disconnect from his bear and his disconnect from pretty much life. And so it was quite an involved process.
Aaron, how about you? Who do we get to hang out with in the story?
Well, the main character is Wily Kang, who is probably the nicest Yeti you'll ever meet. He's huge, strong, immune to cold, and really just wants to be left alone to just chill out. He lives in Embarrass, Minnesota, which is one of the coldest towns in the United States. Once I discovered that in the name, it was pretty much the perfect place to put him. He hunts and fishes, sells what he catches to like the local diners and stuff. Makes enough to buy things like microwave pizza and 6-packs, and just has a nice quiet life until a hunter shows up at his doorstep, tracking down some horrific murders. So he winds up fleeing to the big city because he figures no one will find him there, and is astonished to discover a whole bunch of supernaturals living there, just having normal lives, and suddenly discovers that he can actually make friends. And I had a ton of fun with this book because, like Jonathan, I like to turn things on its ear. And it's fun to take a lot of classic mythological creatures and see how they would be updated. One of the first people Wiley meets who becomes one of his best friends is a character named Nox, who is a redcap. Which, of course, are traditional, bloodthirsty goblins whose caps must constantly be dripping in blood. Only Nox has discovered that oil paint works just as well and never dries. So, easy peasy. So I have banshees. I have an incubus. I have a Kishi, which is a two-faced demon from Angola. I have goblins, trolls, a minotaur who's a ton of fun. It's just so much fun to get to throw in all of these people and then figure out, all right, how would they actually make a living? What would they do? How would they look? And what kind of interactions would they have with each other and with the world around them?
Cool.
Alledria?
Very nice.
We're talking about Audacious Car. That is her first Audacious. Now, this is like after Earth. So some of the names of these people are just like, you have Audacious and Cosmic and Dare, and they're not what we would consider normal people names. They're almost like what you would name your pets. But this is what they have been named as people. Now, in order for a child to be born, you have to have the people on the space station faithful have to basically make a child. And then the child is sent to the Middling Academy, where it is essentially raised by robots and taught about prior Earth and the world that they will either ascend or descend to, depending on what happens when they drink their nanites. So Audacious, or Audie as she's often called, is my primary character, and she is the one who we follow throughout the story. She is the girl with the last name. Her name is Audacious Carr. Nobody else has a last name. So, because she is the only child that was allowed to stay with her family until the age of 5. So she actually knows who her parents are. Everybody else is like, Mom, Dad, who? So she's different in that situation. But that also means that she has all the expectations of having had a family kind of stuffed on her. So when the nanites essentially fail and she descends, it breaks her heart. And then she spends a lot of time trying to get back to trying to prove that she's not descended, trying to make herself more available to the space station, because of course she wants to go to where her family is.
You know, one of the things that I always love to see and get an idea of when you're reading and looking at the power of myth is, what are those influences? And pretty much with everything we're talking about tonight, myth, both modern myth and ancient myth, come into play in all of these stories so much. So, Amy, what are kind of the influences that really had an impact, and how did you decide what influences helped to create this series?
Well, besides Leverage, which, let's face it, was just, I found it so iconic. I found the ideas of these people with this, hey, I'm a hacker, but I've got all the money in the world. Why can't I just hack for good? I found that wonderful. I found the idea that just because your skill set isn't on the up and up doesn't mean your life is crap. So that idea was founded on the idea of the trickster god. And I actually invoke the name of trickster gods at the beginning. It is not a supernatural book, but at the very beginning, in the very first book, Sterling is asking Danny, who's like a father figure or Uncle Danny to a lot of the younger grifters. He's like, but are we good or are we bad? Are we for good or evil? And Danny says, well, we're trickster gods. And trickster gods were levelers, that the world is essentially chaos. And a lot of times the people with all the power are not the people who look out for the little guy. So we are the people, we are the chaos, the element of chaos that can level the world on the side of people who don't always have that power. And that idea that these people are gods of chaos. Every one of them has the capacity for, and there's almost always a completely chaotic scene. In this particular book, the finale is completely chaotic, which is wonderful. But there's also a minor chaotic scene where they're trying to get a little bit of information to find out who killed Sterling and his foster sister's foster parents. And that is the big quest. That is the big thing in this particular book. And Sterling's in the van because that's where he belongs, but they're monitoring the thief who is in the ventilation system, and their mercenary who is pretending to be just an average Joe in the Port Authority, and their grifters who are taking the attention of the manager of the Port Authority, and their suit who has actually found a pretense to go in and hack their computers. So they're monitoring all these people to make sure none of them can get caught. And in the middle of it, they're like, oh no, this is, if we're not careful, we're going to set off this alarm. And our thief, who is the just absolute chaos, says to his boyfriend over the intercoms, Hunter, beast mode. And for a second, you're like, oh no. And Hunter goes, I am not going into beast mode, you little. You're going to have to figure your way out of this yourself. And so there is always that element that, yes, the world is chaos and we all have our talents, but we need to use them to help people who cannot sort the chaos as well as we can.
Jonathan, I know that this could be a dissertation, but
I will keep it moderately brief. There are various pantheons that influence the story. I do draw on the Lovecraftian ones more, partly because I edit Weird Tales magazine, so we're kind of in that zone anyway. Partly because those creatures, Lovecraftian monsters, also appeared in the Conan stories, and the book right above my head there is the very first book I ever bought as a kid, and that's Conan the Wanderer. So it's less traditional religion, but folklore, however, does play quite a big role in it. Before I became a novelist, I wrote 5 books on nonfiction books on folklore, and it was actually doing the research on that inspired me to write fiction. And this draws on a lot of Celtic folklore. I'm Scottish, so I draw on Irish and Scottish folklore, some English folklore as well, but also just various kinds of folklore. If the world, since the story is set 50,000 years in the future, the societies that we know will have crumbled. But if these beings existed, somehow they would survive, and their legends would echo through race memory or whatever with us, so that we'd have kind of a memory of them. And I kind of play with the fact that a lot of people are exposed to folkloric things in school, in movies, and whatever. They don't have full memory of it, but they have kind of a memory of it. So there's kind of a little hints here and there for them to go, oh, I remember that. So that's part of it. I also wanted to play a little bit with bashing tropes. Like, I hate stories of the chosen one. I hate chosen one stories. My character is literally damned for his inability to defend anyone in the beginning of the story. So he's not anyone's idea of a chosen one. So that was fun. The characters that are the toughest aren't necessarily ones you'd expect to be tough. There's a young woman, she's about 19, who happens to be the consort of Cthulhu, spiritual consort of Cthulhu. She has him at her back. You don't expect that from a character who, when you meet her, she just doesn't seem to wield that kind of power. But that's kind of the point. Just because you're tall and have biceps doesn't make you a powerful person. Power is something inside that manifests in its own way individually. So we see that that occurs in folklore. Some of the heroes in some of the less popular folklore are just ordinary people who go a little further or do a little more or take a risk others don't, and they wind up becoming the protagonists of their own stories. So I do a lot of that with it too. I love bringing elements of folklore, but also elements of poetry, a lot of pre-Raphaelite and 19th century poetry, like Tennyson's Lady of Shalott and Keats' La Madame Sans Merci and others, bringing those elements in as if they were actual bits of folklore, and I fold them into fairy legends and other things. Part of the reason I did this is I wanted these echoes of things that readers would kind of half remember. Like, I've heard of that somewhere. What is it I remember about that? And then they see a manifestation of it. Hopefully they'll go and look it up and, enrich themselves by reading that bit of poetry or that bit of folklore or whatever. But for me, it's just fun to take all the different things I've been exposed to over the years. And one last little bit on this. My grandmother is the one that introduced me to all of this. If you can imagine Luna Lovegood from Harry Potter as an old lady, that was my grandmother. She believed in everything. Red caps, hinky vampires, all of these creatures she believed in. And I knew about the folkloric versions of supernatural creatures long before I met them in Universal and Hammer films and so on. So this book is something that I think she would enjoy because she'd be able to pick out all these little Easter eggs and know what they are. So this was written as much for her as it is for my readers, though she has long since passed.
Lisa, how about you?
I'm sort of listening to all these and I'm sort of thinking, have I actually got anything like perhaps I should have spoken about my book about Loki instead, but still, with this one, I think what I do or how I've approached my God series books is as, first of all, I always go and look and see what's been written by them first. And these are by scholars and by storytellers and things like that. And I actually put at the beginning of all of my God series books, I put an apology to those scholars and those people who do the research and everything else, because what I'm looking for, and perhaps a better example of that might be Loki, is when I read him, and read what he'd gotten up to in various, epic tales of old. He's a Marvel character, right, isn't it? And see, now I'm showing my ignorance because I don't know. But anyway, not the modern version of Loki, but the older version of Loki. And my first thought was, my goodness, he's so misunderstood. And it actually, and I feel it perhaps bears mentioning here, after I put the book out and I created Loki in my image, it was what I wanted. It was that he was still a trickster god, but that he was basically, he just wanted to help people. And he was easy to blame because he had mixed parentage. And anyway, that's how that went. But I have to say, out of the 90 odd books that I've written, Loki's story is the only one, and it's in this God series, where a reader actually rang me up on Messenger, and I happened to be online and took the call and told me I had just sabotaged my career. Because of what I'd done with Loki. And the thing was, and I'd said, well, how far have you got? And she said, I'm like on chapter 5. I said, would you keep reading? It makes sense, just keep going. And so there wasn't a lot about Helios. When I came to read about Helios, he's actually somebody that's really understated. Well, there wasn't a lot I could find. And so, but that's what I do, is I'll take what I can find and then gain an impression, and it's like just a feeling, and then I'll cherry pick certain bits, because of course all we know about gods and what have you and mythologies is what humans have written about celestial beings. So it's kind of made up, a bit like what we do in our work. So I take a bit of license with that. So there isn't a lot, like somebody reading any of my God series isn't going to learn a lot about what has been written about them before, but what they may find is like certain facts. For example, when I wrote Hades' book, I couldn't ignore the fact that he took Persephone, I hope that's how it's pronounced. But, so I had to find a way of making that work, making that story work within my story, so he didn't come across as a complete creep, because, you can't be the heroine of a hero of a story if you're a creep. So, yeah, that's kind of what I've done with Helios as well, although there was nothing actually. The worst thing that I could find written about Helios was that because he was driving the sun chariot, he saw a lot of things, usually gods getting up to no good. And because of the type of person he was, he would tell his peers about this. And he would, I'm trying to think of an example, and I'm afraid the names have completely skipped my head, but where in one example where he might have seen somebody like Apollo or somebody having an affair with somebody else, then he's mentioned it to the significant other because he felt that it was the right thing to do, and he actually had a lot of morals. But that didn't make him a favorite among his peers either. So, yeah, there's those sorts of things that I've kind of played with, but I do tend to just pick a few facts. So, like, I think it was Jonathan, I think had mentioned, where somebody would say, "Oh yeah, I remember that." It's just enough to paint that framework, so they get the idea that, oh yes, that's what Lisa's writing about, but it's actually, yeah, it's creating a persona on top of that mythology. Who is that person themselves? So that's what I explore in my stories. So hopefully that answers the question.
So Aaron, how about you? What sort of, how did you pull upon myth, legend? Because of course you've got a lot there to deal with the Yeti, as well as some of the other creatures you brought into your world. But how did folklore come into play in terms of influence what you were doing, and maybe even how you came up with the story?
Well, so it's a lot like what Lisa said, actually. For me, a lot of it has to do with the fact that, I love, myths and fairy tales and folklore. I have since I was a kid. But, when you look at a lot of it, obviously it's mostly, sort of boogeyman. It's monsters. But you'll see, like kobolds, it's just, they all act the same way. They're sort of this faceless horde, right, of creatures. Goblins, same sort of thing. And so what I really wanted to do and enjoyed doing with this book and continuing to do with the series as it goes on is sort of humanizing them. It's not that every creature is misunderstood. It's not that every one of these, supernaturals is, a diamond in the rough and, a heart of gold and so on. But some of them are, but all of them are people. They're all individuals, so each goblin, I have 3 kobolds who are cousins who are in this book, and they're some of my favorite people to write because they're hilarious when playing off each other and just giving each other trouble exactly the way you would with your brother or sister or cousin or whatever. But they're each different. They each have a different personality, and they each have their strengths and their weaknesses, just like any normal person would. The fact that they have, scaly, sort of slightly golden skin and tails has nothing to do with that. And that's what I really wanted to get across. And that's Wiley is such a fun character to write because at his heart, he's just a decent guy, who just happens to be 7 feet tall and 300-pound covered in white fur with enormous claws and fangs, but that's not him. That's not who he is. And so that's what I really wanted to get to in pulling out these figures from mythology and getting to play with them and showing these other sides of them.
Alledria?
Well, the classic heaven and hell, which we end up finding out that under the right circumstances, one can make a home in hell. So yeah, that's basically the whole mythology there is just you can ascend into heaven, you can descend into hell, and it all really matters what you make of your circumstances.
So, Toni, I'm going to kind of let you round this out. I'm not putting any pressure on you at all as you look at a collection of stories.
Yeah, so this is, I have to kind of go on the outside of what people's inspirations were, just judging on the stories. So I'm looking through the table of contents here, and Jonathan Maberry's story, which was Mustafa, was the $1 Million Hunt, and I think there's a lot of inspiration from the famous story, the Most Dangerous Game, which he takes a modern and really funky approach to. Dana Cameron did one using Pam, who's one of the meaner vampires who works with Eric, and hers was the sun, the moon, and the stars, and she drew inspiration from the language of flowers, of all things, which is not something you would necessarily expect in a vampire story. Let's see, not Nicole Keeler. Suzanne MacLeod is a British urban fantasy writer. She did one called The Bat Signal. I think we know where she might have gotten inspiration from that. The only one that I can be absolutely sure where I actually Love Story by Gene Stein. I think it has kind of a feel of The Bridges of Madison County. Not a story I love, but I thought she put a nice twist on it that felt very much like that. But the only story I can definitively tell where it came from was my own, which was The Real Santa Claus. And I used the most, famous of the mythological creatures that most of us encounter a whole lot between November and December, which is Santa Claus. And kind of the point of the story is Diantha, who's a half demon, who doesn't really kind of get all this Christmas stuff, though she really does like presents. And dressing in wild clothes that look like laundry day every day. And what kind of creature was Santa Claus? Was he a werewolf? Was he a vampire? And that's kind of the point of the story for her, is deciding what the heck was Santa Claus? So that's the only one I can definitively tell the inspiration. It was the folklore of Santa Claus.
Well, definitively, we should be stacking up everybody's to-be-read piles. But before we let them go, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys and those new releases. So, Alledria, where can we find you? Website, social media, and of course, where can they find the new book?
The new book is available on most places where ebooks are sold. You can always find me at alledriahurt.com. If you can spell my name, I'm usually easy to find. Except on Twitter. Twitter, it is at Our Lady of Ashes, and that's the one holdout I have where I did not use my real name, because Twitter was before I became an author. And yeah, so just feel free to look me up. I have new fiction coming out on my podcast. There's stories everywhere every Friday.
Toni?
Because of the two names I write under, I have two websites. I've got Toni L.P. Kelner.com and LeighPerryAuthor.com. They commingle and they have all the links to my other social media on there. The book, Dead But Not Forgotten, will be coming out in this a trade paperback edition next Tuesday, which will be January 17th. So it should be available in bookstores or wherever books are found.
Amy?
So you can find me online at Amy Lane Anonymous or my Patreon, Amy's HEA Lane. Amy Lane Anonymous is my Facebook group, my Facebook author group. And you can find my books at Amazon. You can also find, they come out in mass market. This particular series comes out in mass market, but usually about 4 months after the ebook has been released. And it is available in ebook right now in Amazon and all the other places.
Jonathan?
I'm pretty easy to find if you spell my last name right. It's M-A-B, not M-A-Y-B. Everybody wants to put that Y in there. JonathanMaberry.com is my website. All social media platforms, I'm on there, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, I'm all everywhere. The new book is Son of the Poison Rose, and it's available in print, ebook, and audio, read by Ray Porter. And I've got a lot of stuff out there, and also Weird Tales magazine, so check that out too.
Lisa?
I actually, probably my granddaughter could tell you this best. She Googled me one day and she said, "My goodness, Grandma," she said, "they can find you everywhere." And that's basically it. The only thing, yeah, she thinks I'm famous because my name's on Google, which is really, that's just so sweet. But yeah, my website is paranormalgayromance.com. Alledria, my Twitter is actually Wisecrone. I think it's Wisecrone333. But otherwise, if you type in Lisa Oliver into Google, Lisa Oliver author, because there is a CEO in South Africa that is also Lisa Oliver. But yeah, Lisa Oliver author into Google, you can find me just about everywhere. And my books are, you can find Give Me a Reason, Helios' story on Amazon, and it's also distributed through Smashwords. So yeah, the links are all on my website.
Aaron?
Oh, and I'm on YouTube. Sorry, go on.
So you actually can't find me through my name usually because there are way too many Aaron Rosenbergs. You can find me at Griffin Rose, GryphonRose.com. I'm Griffin Rose on Twitter and on Facebook. I'm also at crazyapepress.com, crossroadpress.com, fallstepbooks.com, and probably at least 5 other publishers I can't think of, including eSpec/Neo Paradoxa, which is where Yeti Left Home is coming out. It'll be out February 1st. It's already listed for pre-order on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, pretty much everywhere else.
And I have had the pleasure of being your host this evening, Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, thespeculative-fiction-academy.com, creatingprose.com, and of course, here at ConTinual when I take a long breath. Go stack up those to-be-read piles. You guys all have those brand new Kindles. Go get them now.